This is the dry bean production short course being hosted through the University of Vermont, but with a number of partners, including the University of Maine, Cornell University, the University of Wisconsin. Our project, which we call ECOBEAN, is a organic dry bean collaborative made up of all of these universities as well as farmers that we're working with through our research. And our EcoBean collaborative has been funded through the USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, through the Organic Research and Education Initiative. So as part of our research and outreach, our goal was to bring education about growing dry beans to our community. So welcome. We're glad that you're able to join us for this short course that starts today. And I think there's maybe a second slide. As folks know, the class will go on for 2.5 weeks or 5 meetings, and each meeting will cover a new topic. So you've already received the class agenda. The format of each meeting starts with a main topic, and the one today is about dry bean varieties and dry bean breeding. But then after that main topic, we'll have a short presentation from a number of graduate students that have been working on the EcoBean project and developing new and exciting research results on dry beans. So they'll be sharing that with you, and then we'll spend the rest of the time answering questions and having a Q&A. So each class, you'll be able to receive a continuing education credit if you are a certified crop advisor, and the QR code will be shared at the end of the day. Now, this program or short course is meant to really be like a course. And as you know, and you've already received the information for accessing the course and the course materials on an online platform. And Ivy, who you've heard from quite a bit in this process, she's been the primary organizer through EcoBean. She's been sending you information about this, asking you to access the course platform and trying to show everybody how to do that. But she is going to go through that today live so everybody can see it and hopefully get on there. And I also just wanted to give a quick thank you not only to Ivy for organizing all this, but to Shannon McDonald, who she's got her video off, but she's also been organizing and helping our larger team put all this together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ivy to walk everyone through the online course website and platform. So if you haven't accessed it, she'll show you how. So Ivy?
Perfect. Thanks, Heather. Yep, so like Heather was saying, we have the dry bean course on the Extension Foundation campus, and all of this information that Heather just shared, as well as what I'm going to talk about, is available in the welcome letter that you should all have received when you enrolled in the course. So if at any point you need extra help or have issues, my email as well as Shannon's email is in that welcome letter. So feel free to contact us and we can help you out there. So I'm just going to show you the website. Let me switch screens. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the Extension Foundation homepage. And if you can't, maybe Shannon will just say so.
We can see
Otherwise,
it.
I'll just.
We can see it.
Okay,
Looks good.
perfect. So this is the home page. So once you've enrolled in the Dry Bean short course, you got the welcome letter, and hopefully you followed the instructions there and went to the campusextension.org site. And that's what you're seeing here. So if you haven't, this is what it looks like. And one of the first things that you'll need to do is to log in or create an account. So to do that, in the upper right-hand corner, that is where you should see login, which if you've never logged in before, you're gonna, you see it says, is this your first time here? And if it is, you have to create a new account, which is really straightforward. You just follow the instructions that it prompts you with. And once you do that, you will be able to create a new account. And the reason I want to highlight that is because the Dry Bean course, you can't enroll in it if you don't have an account with Extension Foundation. So I'm going to log in. And now you'll see the homepage for the Dry Bean short course, which again, hopefully you've been here. This is linked in the welcome letter. And this is a good catch-all for the schedule for the class, with the speakers that we're going to have and the topics for each class. But it also is going to house extra materials, recordings of the webinars, and just helpful information. So before I scroll down, I just want to show you, so if you haven't enrolled in the Dry Bean short course, you can search for it from the homepage. So all you have to do is type in dry beans, hit go, and then organic dry bean production. You'll see that. If you searched the course and you hadn't made an Extension Foundation account yet, what you would see in this box here, it would say course is not available to guests. So you have to have an account before you can enroll in the course. But so now we're on this page here, and I'll just scroll down to module 1. That's what we are covering today, an introduction to dry beans. So the first thing I want to highlight is the pre-course survey, which hopefully everyone filled out. But if you haven't, there's still time. We'd appreciate your responses. And in that, we're just looking to see what your current knowledge is of dry beans, but also there are opportunities in there to put questions or topics you're interested in. And we still have 4 sessions after this. So please put that in there and we can share that with speakers or bring that information to each session so we can use it in the discussion. The link to the virtual class is right here, which if you're joined, hopefully you have that handy, but if you need to find it again, it's on here. And then for each module, we have the slides that our speaker is going to share, as well as some additional information that they cover and we think will be helpful following the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing this website. But again, if you have specific questions or have issues accessing the course, the recordings, anything like that, the easiest thing to do is just to email myself or Shannon and we can help you sort that out. So I'm gonna stop sharing that and get the slides back up. So hopefully folks can see my slides.
Yep, we can see it.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so let me just advance. So there will be CCA credits available at the end, so stick around for that. But I just wanted to introduce our speaker for today, who you're going to hear from. So we have Dr. Virginia Moore today, and she's going to talk about an introduction to dry beans and dry bean varieties and market classes. Dr. Moore is from Cornell University. She's an assistant professor at the School of Integrative Plant Science in plant breeding and genetics. And she's also the principal investigator of the Moore Lab. So with that, Shannon is going to get the video queued up so we can hear from her.
And Ivy, there is a question in the
Oh.
chat, so maybe you can just
Yep,
answer that.
sorry.
Okay, no problem.
And while the video is getting queued up, we will be doing a question and answer discussion following the presentation. So have your questions ready, and we'll be speaking with Dr. Moore in about 25 minutes after we watch the video.
Hello, my name is Virginia Moore, and I'm an assistant professor in plant breeding and genetics at Cornell University. My lab works on several different crops, including dry beans, but also cover crops and forages, with a big focus on breeding for organic and sustainable management systems. I got involved in dry beans through the ECOBEAN project, which you'll be hearing much more about during this short course over the next few weeks. I'll be kicking off the short course with an introduction to dry beans as a crop. You'll be hearing in much more detail about specific management considerations over the coming weeks. Before I start, I especially want to acknowledge that many of these slides and the research that I'll present are adapted from previous presentations from especially from Extension Support Specialist Kristen Loria, and also my former graduate student, Erica Everest, who did her master's work on dry beans. And the research work also had many contributions from collaborators, both at Cornell and at other institutions that collaborate on the EcoBean project. So starting out, I'll be talking first about the origins of dry beans as a crop, and then about some of the market classes that are grown today and the major production regions within the US. And then I'll talk briefly at the end about variety selection considerations for organic systems. So first, common bean is the more general term that we use to describe both dry beans and snap beans. They're the same species whose Latin name is Phaseolus vulgaris. And the Phaseolus family also includes several crop relatives that you might be familiar with, including lima bean, runner bean, and tepary bean. The history of common bean domestication and development as a crop is really fascinating and a little bit complicated. But to summarize really briefly, there were two separate domestication events in Central America and in South America, and we refer to these as the Middle American gene pool and the Indian gene pool. And within those gene pools, there are subgroupings that we call races that subdivide those gene pools based on the region of origin and some key characteristics. For example, the race Durango evolved in modern day Mexico and is adapted to hot and arid environments, whereas the race Mesoamerica was developed further south in Central America and is better adapted to humid lowlands. These 6 distinct races that are listed on the map evolved within the Americas, but we've also seen a lot of divergence and evolution that's happened elsewhere in the world since being moved as a crop beyond the Americas into other parts of the world as well. And cultures have developed their own kind of distinct types that they've developed and have evolved with their culinary and cultural needs. And today we group dry beans by what we call market classes, which have a commonly understood set of characteristics and expected standards that are especially important when they're sold as a commodity. The dry bean market classes include groups that you would be familiar with and see on supermarket shelves, such as pinto, black, and kidney beans. The major market classes sold in the US also correspond to 4 of the races that I described on the last slide. So the race Jalisco includes pink and small red beans. Durango includes pinto and great northern beans. The Mesoamerican race includes black and navy beans, and the race Nueva Granada includes light red kidney, dark red kidney, white kidneys, and cranberries. And the first 3 that I mentioned are all from the Middle American gene pool, and Nueva Granada races from the Indian gene pool. Beyond these major market classes, you might be also curious to know how some of the heirloom beans that you've grown or eaten fit into the dry bean gene pools. And so most of the large seeded heirlooms that are common in the Northeast US are from the Nueva Granada group, along with the kidneys and cranberries. So that includes groups like the soldier beans, Jacob's cattle, and yellow eye, and then the heirloom Anasazi is from the Durango group. This table summarizes some of the key characteristics of different market classes. So the table is arranged by seed size, with the smallest seeded types listed at the top, and the largest seeded ones at the bottom. And you can also see that the major genetic groups correspond to seed size. So the races from the Middle American gene pool tend to have smaller seeds, while the Indian or South American gene pool have larger seeds. The dry bean races and their corresponding market classes also differ by growth habit, with some tending to be more determinate while others are more indeterminate. And you might be familiar with those terms, determinate and indeterminate, from growing a number of crops. But within dry beans, we've categorized the growth habits in a little bit more detail. So we describe the growth habits as type 1 through type 4, although these commercial varieties that you might be more familiar with are limited to types 1 through 3. And growth habits influence performance and management in several different ways, including harvestability, the pod height above the soil surface, tendency to get disease symptoms, and issues with staining of the seed coat, which can affect marketability. So the type 1 growth habit type, those plants tend to be more determinate, to be shorter season plants, and also have less robust stress tolerances. And kidney beans are the major market class that falls into this group, type 1. Whereas type 2 plants are described as indeterminate, but they're still upright and have a shorter vine, so they could still be direct harvested often. And that category, black and navy beans are fit into that group. And then type 3 plants are indeterminate as well, but they're more prostrate and vining, you can see, and they're not as suitable for direct harvest. Importantly, though, there's still quite a bit of variation within market classes and within the broader genetic groups for growth habit. And so you might have seen in the previous table that I showed that within the Andean gene pool, even though, for example, many kidney beans are type 1, there were also some other growth habit types within that South American group. And the same is true of the Central American types. They have a range of growth habits. So that means that we still have potential to make improvements within the market classes and the broader gene pools. So there are some challenges and limitations, though, especially because of the way the different gene pools evolved. So because these two gene pools are more distantly related, it can be hard to make crosses between plants across the Central and South American gene pools. So we would have a harder time crossing, for example, type 1 kidney beans with some of the other market classes that are type 2 and type 3. And there were, most of the fully determinate genetics available are from that Nueva Granada, the South American group. So this can limit progress somewhat to go make extreme changes in the growth habits, or incorporating other traits like disease resistances if they're present in one group but not the other. So something to keep in mind. There are limits to our ability to make crosses across different groups. Beyond growth habit, there's also several other major breeding goals that we think about for dry bean. Yield is one obvious one that is important, obviously, across lots of crops. So plant architecture, like we've been talking about. Disease resistance is really important. Processing quality, especially for canning, there's a number of traits associated with that. And then some other traits like early maturity, insect resistance, other stress tolerances, for example, for drought. And we have seen a lot of progress in dry bean over the last 100+ years of cultivation and breeding that's been happening. So we see an average around a 1% increase in yield per year over the last 100 years. And part of this improvement can be attributed to breeding, but of course not all. We've also seen big changes in management of dry beans and changes in the growing region as well, which have influenced yield. So thinking about the growing region, I know that the audience for this webinar is broad across the country, but I'll use my home region as an example. So dry beans have been historically grown in the Northeast for a long time. So since before European settlement, where I am in New York State, dry beans were once a major crop and continues to be important culturally and as a subsistence crop, both for indigenous communities that are located here and for other communities in the region. And at the peak of dry bean production in the 1940s, we were growing a significant amount of dry beans. Especially you can see kidneys and navies were also quite important, as well as some other groups in the green line. But production really dropped off in the second half of the 20th century for a number of different reasons that kind of interacted to cause this decline. There's some issues with big disease outbreaks like bean common mosaic virus and some different root rots. And there was also expanding agricultural land available in the Western US and expansion in that region. And so today we see pretty minimal production as a proportion of the total of the US, so less than 1% of national production in the most recent data that we have. So what it looks like today, a lot of the production has moved west. So North Dakota represents just over half of the total acreage in the US for dry beans. Michigan and Minnesota, you can see, are represented as well, a significant amount of acreage. And then the rest of the production is split a few percentage each per state across several different Western states. However, we think there's reasons to think that there are opportunities to increase dry bean production in places like New York and other parts of the Northeast and Upper Midwest. So we've seen over the last decades of dry bean breeding some major improvements in disease resistance that wasn't there when dry bean production left our region. And we also see changing markets and interests of consumers, opportunities for things like organic markets and local and regional produce demands that could translate to dry beans and other pulses. And I think farmers are starting to see benefits, and hopefully your presence here at the webinar is attest to this, that opportunities to diversify rotations and enterprises that make dry beans more interesting for our regions that are not currently major producers. My main role with the ECOBEAN project is to lead dry bean variety testing and breeding efforts focused on varieties for organic production in the Northeast and Upper Midwest. I won't have time to talk in detail about our breeding efforts, but I will talk about the variety testing work since it might be especially useful more immediately for folks thinking about selecting appropriate varieties for their farms. I'll be presenting results from our 2023 and 2024 variety trials, which took place in Maine, New York, Vermont, and Wisconsin. We tested varieties from several major market classes, including black, navy, pinto, and small red classes, as well as some specialty and heirloom types. On average, we found that the heirloom and specialty types had lower yield than the other major market classes, which is not necessarily surprising because the major market classes have received much more focus from dry bean breeding programs. But just to drill in a little more detail, so each of these subfigures represents results from one location year combination, with the first two showing data from Maine in 23 and 24, then New York, Vermont, and Wisconsin. So you can see all of these data points highlighted in green represent market classes that were significantly greater than the specialty types, which are represented in the last column within each box. So you can see this result, right, that commercial classes tended to perform better than specialty, but grouping all of the varieties we tested by market class masks a lot of variation within class. So we'll drill into that in the next slide here. So this is a lot of data, and we won't look at all of it in detail today, but I do want to note that we're currently working on an updated extension report that includes all of this data. So if you're keep a lookout for that. But if you're eager to dig into data now, this data is also published in a scientific journal. The paper is listed at the bottom here, and it's an open access publication, so you can find it online and read all of the details in that publication. But to orient you to this data, each of the location year combinations is shown as a row in the figure. So you can see this first row is Maine in 2023, followed by Maine in 24, etc. So each state year combination. And then each of the different market classes is a column. So black, navy, pinto, small reds, and specialties in each of these columns here. And then each variety within the market class is listed as a separate data point with a confidence interval. And so you can see that some of the market classes, such as black beans, had pretty consistent performance across all of the years and locations, while others had more variation. And so highlighted in green here are all of the location and year and market class combinations that had some differences between varieties. So again, see here you can see a lot of the locations had no differences between any of the black bean varieties. But as you get towards the right side of the figure, like the small red, at all but one site year, we had some variation between varieties, and the same is true for the specialty beans. There was a lot more variation. And just to complicate things further, so you see like there's not necessarily a totally consistent story across all of the site years. So it's a little bit difficult to make a recommendation like, hey, this is the best variety at every location across our region of interest. We can't make a single variety recommendation for everybody. A lot of year, environment, variety interaction. But one thing we thought was pretty interesting is that two of the specialty varieties, Desert Song and UC Southwest Gold, showed so these are two of the heirloom varieties we were interested in that we tested. They had higher yield than most of the other heirloom or specialty varieties in many of the site years that they were tested. And in many cases, they were comparable to some of the varieties of the major market classes. So even though on average the heirloom and specialty beans had lower yields, it wasn't true across the board. So there is some good germplasm even within specialty and heirloom, and potential for breeding and improvement to make them even more competitive. In addition to yield, we were also interested in comparing plant architecture and pod height among different varieties to identify those that were more suitable for direct harvest. So again, I'll go through the data kind of stepwise and walk you through what you're seeing here. So you can see each of these panels represents a single variety, and it also indicates the market class it comes from. And instead of representing them by site year, we've color coded the site years. So each of the data points is an observation from a given site and location. And this figure is showing both uprightness or the plant architecture, and a lower number in this case is better, and pod height, and in that case, a higher number is better. So a good variety in terms of direct harvest is one that has most of its points in the upper left quadrant. And so we saw several varieties of black and navy beans that were upright but had pods that were closer to the ground. And we also found varieties from several different market classes, mostly pinto, reds, and specialties that had higher pod height, but less upright architecture. So they were more like type 3 growth habit, but still with higher pods. And we only found a few varieties, so 5, that had both upright plant architecture and higher pod height. So these are kind of the optimal. And they were mostly black beans. There was one pinto variety as well that fit into this category. So there are some good varieties for direct harvest, but lots of room for improvement, especially in market classes other than black beans. And so that's all I'll present on our data for now, although I'm happy to answer questions. And the last topic that I'll touch on briefly is seed sourcing. So my sort of most clear recommendation for folks is to, if you can, purchase certified seed that has been produced in Western states. And this helps avoid a lot of the common seed-borne diseases that are prevalent in the Eastern and Upper Midwest US. But the caveat there is that there's often limited availability of varieties outside of the major market classes. So if you're interested in growing more of the heirloom and specialty types, you might struggle a bit to find seed that is within this category. And so then you have to think about some alternate sources, and those would mainly be smaller and specialty seed companies and seed savers. The challenge there, or one of the challenges, of course, is that you might have less certainty about the seed quality. And you may also only be able to get seed in smaller quantities. So if you're planning to grow larger acreage of some of these varieties, you would need to increase your own seed to produce more at a larger scale. So that's all I will discuss today, but I'll end with a plug to visit our ECOBEAN website for resources from our research and extension team, and as well as some other resources from other universities with bean breeding programs and research programs. And with that, I'll end my recording, and looking forward to answering your questions.
Awesome. So thank you so much. I want to thank Ginny again for putting together that presentation and sharing all that information with everybody. So Now we are going to go into our Q&A and discussion portion. So Dr. Moore is here and she's going to answer questions that you may have. I see some already coming through the chat, so you can put them in there if you would like. I would also invite people, if you want to ask your question aloud, you can do the raise hand function, and we'll invite you to ask your question. So I saw Ginny had answered a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll just reiterate a couple of those in case people didn't see that. One person had asked if Anasazi beans were a subclass of pintos, and Ginny had said they are from, she understands that they're from the same race, Durango, but not grouped with pintos in terms of market class. So now I'll start with questions from the chat for Ginny, and then if more follow up, we can go from there. So actually the first question, we'll get into this more in later sessions, but Ginny, could you talk about what direct harvest means and what are the alternatives?
Yeah, so it looks like Ryan, somebody else already answered this in
Sorry.
the chat, but I can reiterate that too. So the idea with direct harvest, I'm sorry to yeah, if any of the lingo was confusing for folks, if there's any other sort of terminology questions that people had, please pipe up. But direct harvest is like using a combine that you would for other grain crops, compared to when you cut or pull the bean plants and windrow them and then come back and harvest them later after they've dried down a bit. And yeah, and generally direct harvest works better with the like type 1, type 2 beans, compared to the more vining types. And
yeah, and Kristen Loria is going to talk on Friday about production and management, so I'll put a plug in for that, and she'll go into a bit more detail. And then later on, we'll have a section on harvest as well. So we'll have some more information coming on that topic.
And I'm just turning my video off because I know the camera is doing something weird here, but I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah, and okay, I see the next question is about specifically about sourcing Charo pinto beans and in Canada, and I don't know much about the Canadian seed sourcing options. Yeah, but I can look into that and follow up for folks. Yeah, in general, we try to get, as I mentioned in the last slide, we try to source our seed from Western suppliers in the US in general as much as we can, because of disease challenges. But yeah, I don't know as much about the options in Canada. And yeah, it is possible to, at least we're able to import seed from Canada, and we do some exchange of at least smaller quantities of seed for research purposes. But yeah, I'm not super knowledgeable about the options in terms of importing or for Canadian sourced seed.
And I can also put in the chat, in our dry bean production guide, we had put together some seed sourcing options. They're all within the United States, but it really varies the quantity that you can get. But we did put together a list. It's not extensive, but it might be a starting point if people were looking for somewhere to start. And so let's see. So one of the questions, someone has a question about saving their own seed. Is there any organic treatment to support disease control pre-planting? I don't know, Ginny, if you want to address that. Our module on February 13th is going to be about dry bean diseases, and Dr. Sarah Pethy-Bridge might have more insight into that, but I don't know if you want to
Yeah, I might save it for her.
Okay.
I think she'll have a more complete answer for you. I don't want to give any wrong information.
Yeah. And
It's really her area of expertise.
I'll also encourage folks with these questions, hold on to those. And when we get to module 4, Dr. Pethy Bridge is extremely knowledgeable about dry bean diseases. So we'll have plenty of time to ask her questions. So let me see what we have in here for questions. So one person asked, when you talk about optimal qualities of a dry bean variety, for example, optimal according to what parameters or what defines optimum?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I agree. It varies a lot by especially the scale of farms and a lot of the work that we've done in EcoBean is trying specifically to identify dry bean varieties that are more compatible with like mechanized harvest. But that might be less relevant for smaller growers. And I didn't, yeah, in the short presentation, I didn't have time to talk about the breeding work that we're doing outside of EcoBean, but we're doing some more like on-farm breeding with smaller scale producers who might be like diversified vegetable producers where, you know, dry beans, something that they're doing as one component of a larger operation and they don't have you know, specialized bean equipment. And so then I think there's a lot more flexibility in terms of things like growth habit and, you know, may prefer to have vining types or type, you know, varieties that, yeah, mature at different times, or, you know, there could be all kinds of parameters. So in my, when I have my breeder hat on, I definitely, I'm thinking about sort of what's the product profile that we're thinking about based on the type of farmer that is interested in the variety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
and thank you for talking more about the breeding work that you do because that is, I think it's very interesting, and it is a, I think a lot of people are also interested in just learning more about dry bean varieties and how we can just get improved varieties, especially in the Northeast, but I think everywhere people are interested in that. I wonder, so in the pre-course survey, a couple of people had asked or were curious about, are there um, participatory plant breeding networks? I'm thinking like with the cover crop breeding network that you are a part of, but is there anything like that for dry beans, or is there an opportunity for an individual to be a part of something like that?
absolutely. So yeah, there's you know, depending on the region, there's different people working in this space. There's a lot of good work happening at UC Davis. If anybody's in the West, and the varieties that we have in our trials, or that you might have seen other places that have UC in front of them, as for University of California, and they've been releasing these improved heirlooms. So heirloom types that they've been breeding for improved disease resistance, and it's kind of more targeted at diseases that are important in the West. But and we're kind of trying to do some similar work, but that does have a participatory component with my lab, and so that's the project that I mentioned briefly just now. So we're working with 6 farms right now, kind of spread across the Northeast. But if you're interested in learning more about that, we had our first kind of pilot summer um, last year. So definitely looking for other interested folks and looking to grow that side of the breeding program. So I'll put my email address in the chat if anybody's interested in learning more about that project or wants to suggest varieties that they like that they think need improvement, things like that. So happy to engage with people that are interested in the breeding side of things.
Great, thank you. And I'll also put in a plug. It reminded me because you were talking about UC Davis. A couple of years ago, we had Dr. Travis Parker do a webinar for us and talk about the dry bean breeding work that has been going on. And it's very interesting. And that is also available. That will be linked on our extension page if people want more information or want to revisit that presentation. Dr. Parker goes into the breeding work that they've been doing with some of these varieties. So I'll put a plug in for that. And I'm just going to keep going down the chat here. So I do see some questions and they're more applicable to the production and management. So I won't answer those right now. On Friday, Kristen Loria is going to be joining us and she's going to cover all things from planting to fertility, all the way through harvest. So I'm going to save those for her, and just remember your questions for Friday, because I see a question about soils, so we're going to save that. So someone here, Jason asked, type 3 beans that are prone to lodge. Is there any research or ideas on interseeding with other crops to help stand to keep them up for harvest?
That's a great question. I haven't seen work focused on that for dry bean, although there may well be that I'm not aware of. We are thinking about that with some of the other work I do on pea production. So my lab works on winter pea as a cover crop, and also to some extent as a grain crop. And so we've played around a little bit with intercropping it with a small grain to help with standability. It's a great thought, and I'd be interested to know if anybody else has tried that with dry bean.
Mm-hmm. And so another question, someone asked about pod height. So is higher pod height a desirable trait across production systems? They write, I assume, for harvesting and disease management, or is it more important to larger scale operations with harvest equipment combines? So for a small scale grower, a market gardener, is pod height desirable?
I think that I guess I would assume that it's perhaps most important if you're trying to harvest with larger equipment, but certainly is also important for disease management. And yeah, probably, just in terms of ergonomics for hand harvesting too. I think it is probably valuable across systems, but there may be other people in the room here that have different opinions. I'd be interested to hear as well.
Mm-hmm. I know for us in our smaller plots, in not this past year, but the 2 years prior, where it was just exceptionally wet, any of the varieties where the pods were basically sitting on the ground, the disease pressure, it's quite difficult. So any of the varieties that had a more upright, higher pods tended to fare a little bit better in those 2 really challenging seasons. So, and someone did put in the chat, they highlighted that Seed Savers has some trials. So that is a company that does have some more heirloom varieties of dry beans. And so they might be a good resource for folks to check out as well. And someone did share in the chat that Canadian breeders are working on dry beans and thinking about future work that might include farmers more specifically. And they did put a link in there with that information. So I'm just going to keep scrolling through the chat. Someone did ask if anyone from UC Davis is going to be speaking in this course. Not during this one. We had, like I mentioned earlier, we had Travis Parker talk at a previous webinar, and Shannon might be able to share that link specifically if you are having trouble accessing that, but are curious about Dr. Parker's work. So Roger asked, Jenny, do you know what beans work or have historically worked best in a Three Sisters cropping system?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a specific variety recommendation, but my understanding of the system is that it's more often like the climbing type beans because they're using the corn as a trellis, right? So the like type 4, the most vining types um would fit in the system, I imagine. But yeah, it's a good question.
Mm-hmm. And someone did put in the chat, Mark said sunflowers for living trellis type 3 and 4. So something to give structure for those vining varieties. And let's see. Someone, Missy put that in small gardens, varieties that are more vining on trellises are much more ergonomic and a lot easier to harvest faster by hand, as well as less mold or wet pods touching the ground. So definitely some difference of scale there in terms of what traits people are looking for. And then let's see, I have another question about breeding. So Rebecca had asked, when you do breeding, do you try and have the plant dry down at all the same time? So my understanding is they're asking about uniformity at harvest time, like all the plants drying down at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a follow-up question, but I'll let you answer that one first.
Sure, yeah. And so I guess in terms of dry down, within on a single plant, if they're more determinant, they're gonna dry down at a more similar timing. But then in terms of like variation between plants of a variety, yeah, I guess in our breeding program, we've been most interested in things that dry down all at the same time. And we're also like the populations that we are evaluating. We're in a fairly early stage of the breeding program. We were evaluating F3 populations, so that's like 3 generations after the cross. And so there's still a lot of variability, and we're generally selecting for like earlier season harvest. So we have been selecting like the first plants to dry down. Uh, for the most part. And so yeah, I think ultimately we'll hope to have uniformity among plants, but we're not at that stage yet in the breeding program.
Mm-hmm. And I'll ask the follow-up question that Rebecca also had. Do you select for good emergence, leaf coverage, or other characteristics that are important for organic growers? So canopy cover, emergence, traits like that, I guess.
Yeah, those are definitely ones that we have evaluated in variety trials. I didn't present the data on emergence today, but we have been evaluating that in our trials. And in terms of breeding, for the most part so far, we've been doing what we call evolutionary breeding. So we might be doing some roguing. Like, so if we have really diseased plants, we might pull them out before they reach maturity, um, or like harvesting the first plants to dry down, but not the later material. But other than those selections, we've been sort of limiting how we're intervening, if that makes sense. So over time, we expect that the plants that have like more biomass will and that can outcompete weeds in the plots are going to be more likely to produce more seed and contribute more to the population. So that's like the main approach that we've been taking so far. I think this summer we'll probably do some more kind of aggressive selection for traits like that at our on-station breeding nursery. So and then when we're doing participatory breeding, the farmers are driving the selection decisions quite a bit. So yeah, so it varies a lot by farm how much they're selecting for traits like that, or waiting till the end of the season to make selection decisions, or in between.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. I'll share, Shannon put in the chat that they found climbing varieties that work best in that Three Sisters planting to be rattlesnake, scarlet runner, Kentucky wonder, and any cornfield bean. So if anyone was looking for recommendations, Shannon put some information in there. And so this actually this is a good question. I'm glad someone brought it up. They asked if you were breeding for flavor at all. So I don't know if you want to, I know Erica did some work with some flavor evaluations.
Yeah, that's a great question. We did so. Erica Everest, who is a master's student in my lab, did a couple of years of flavor evaluations with our variety trial material. So that's not with our breeding population so far. We just haven't we haven't had enough seed of our breeding material to actually do flavor evaluations, but we are going to do our first evaluations of breeding populations this winter. I'm definitely interested in breeding for flavor and other texture and other quality traits in the future. Definitely on the list. Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
And I think that some of the flavor evaluation data is in extension materials that are on the ECOBEAN website too. So if you're interested, look at that.
I believe, we put the link into the chat so people can check out the EcoBeam page. There's a lot of good material on there. We have 2 years of multi-state variety trial reports put in there if folks are curious to read about that. And then there was another follow-up about breeding for protein or texture.
Oh, that's a great question. We haven't done any evaluations for protein yet, but my lab does have a near infrared spectroscopy machine that we use to evaluate things like protein in forages, and we just have done our first screening of pulses. So we've done some in peas, and I think we've run some samples from beans, and definitely we're like equipped to start doing that if it seems like it's of interest to people that are interested in beans. So I definitely, if that is important, please let me know, and we'll think about how to invest more resources in that. Oh, and I see a question about bean beetles.
Yeah.
Also, I have seen one older paper that showed some differences in bean varieties, but there's really been very little published on that. But I've heard from people in our area that they have significant issues with this, and it's not easy to manage. So it's definitely on my priority list. And if you have issues with bean beetle and think it's important, please reach out. I would be interested in doing some evaluations on farms. We don't have heavy pressure at our research farm at this point. So if we want to evaluate for beetles, we need to have locations where we know that they are a problem. So please reach out if you're interested in doing any on-farm testing for that.
And I'm looking through the chat again here. Someone did add that the Organic Seed Alliance has been a great resource for production and breeding on a small to medium scale. And Shannon put their website in the chat. So another good resource for folks who are looking for dry bean recommendations on a small scale. So continuing to read through here. Someone did have a question about cleaning practices. I would say we'll wait until module 5 is all about harvest and storage. with Seth Johnson, who is a farmer here in Vermont and is very knowledgeable. So I'll save those kind of questions for later. But Kelsey did ask, are you breeding for drought resistance or drastically different weather each season? Kind of makes me think of the last few years here in Vermont, 2 very wet years followed by an extreme drought year.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have not explicitly, and that's mainly just because in breeding it's really hard to breed for things that are unpredictable.
Yeah.
We can't guarantee that we're going to have like a good year to screen for it. It's much harder to do, at least if we're working in the field. There's some ways around that with controlled environments, but there's some trade-offs there too. I think the best that like are the using the evolutionary approach is helpful in terms like if we're exposing our populations to different conditions, they will, if there's genetic variation in the population, they adapt with those conditions. So that helps, but it certainly, yeah, I have thought about whether we should do some, like there are options like building rain out shelters to like artificially impose drought in the field, things like that. We haven't gone there yet because it is a kind of a big investment, but yeah, I think it's a super important challenge and will be more so in the future. So yeah, great question and definitely
Mm-hmm.
thinking in those directions.
And also it's just after 1 o'clock. The webinar session is scheduled through 1:15, just to give us plenty of time to ask questions. We will be sharing soon. We have some questions, like just a brief post-class survey for folks. And we'll also talk about the next session. But if people have any more questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. I don't know, it's, you kind of alluded to this just now. It's hard probably to make any recommendations, but in terms of variety selection or even market class selection for different weather, like the Northeast, for example, do you have any recommendations for what might be a better choice, depending on if you're in a more wet area or somewhere where it's pretty dry, warm? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always like if talking to people in your region to get a sense of what's worked well on yeah, neighboring farms and looking at the variety trial reports that we have. And there's also some other, especially if you're organic, there's maybe fewer, or if you're looking for more heirloom and specialty types, there's fewer kind of variety evaluation resources out there, but there are some. I think Michigan has done some organic variety trial evaluations in the past. And yeah, there are some other resources which we can link later, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think especially if you like prioritizing getting high quality seed and testing new varieties at a smaller scale before you commit to large acreage of them if you're operating at a larger scale. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. I don't feel like I can endorse one. Any
Yeah.
really specific varieties. But yeah, and yeah, when it's available, adopting varieties that have been bred in your region, I think is a good choice.
Mm-hmm. We another plug, we had this was a few years ago, Scott Bales from Michigan State. He gave a overview webinar about dry bean production, and he puts together their annual variety trial reports, which are a good resource, as well, just looking at different varieties and variety performance. So we can definitely link that in the chat, and those past webinars are also available on the Extension Foundation page, so you can always go back and watch that if you want to learn more information. So I guess I'll invite people, if they do have any more questions, to put them in the chat. But if Shannon, if you want to put up the slides, and I don't know, Ginny, if you have any final thoughts or information you want to share, I'd invite you to do that if you would like.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else too specific. Just again, reach out if you have more questions or interested in the work that we're doing or have suggestions for things we should be breeding for. I got a lot of great ideas in the chat and the conversation today too. So yeah, please keep it coming if this is exciting for you. Yeah.
And I'm seeing in the chat now, Rebecca had asked if you have any resources on protocol development for your trials or tasting trials. I'm not sure if you can speak to that.
I not off of the top of my head, but I know that Erica, who the student in my lab that led the tastings, I can pull materials from her like protocol development process and her thesis and her paper that would be good places to start, I think, and have it, like, if you shoot me an email, I can send that stuff to you.
Great, thank you. And Shannon's putting up the slides here. So like I said earlier, we do have CCA credits available if you need those. And Shannon put the information in the chat. So if you need any additional help with that, just reach out to Shannon. And I want to thank Dr. Virginia Moore again for giving us this presentation and sharing all this information. I hope everyone learned a lot. This topic is really interesting, and obviously, like you've talked about, Jenny, there's just so many things to consider with different dry bean varieties and breeding. So I think there's always room to learn more. But we have this really short survey just to gain knowledge from what you gained from this webinar. So if you could just take a minute to answer those questions for us. This QR code will take you to the survey, but if you don't have time right now or forget, it's on the Extension Foundation site as well. So you can answer it in a few different locations. And I'll just end. I want to talk about our speaker for Friday. So we are going to have Kristen Loria talk about dry bean production and management. So like I said, all things from planting, seeding rates, fertility, all the way up through harvest. So if you had questions today that we did not answer, please bring those with you on Friday so that we can talk about those with Kristen. Kristen is actually the ECOBEAN project coordinator. So she's been the leader on our ECOBEAN project and will give us a lot of helpful information. And we didn't have it this week because of the introduction to the course, but next class, we're going to have a research roundup, and we're going to have one of those at the end of each class going forward, where a student working with one of the people from the project team is going to share a quick presentation on research that they've been doing. And so on Friday, we're going to hear from Maddie Hunter, who is at the University of Maine, and she's going to talk about optimizing nitrogen fertility in organic no-till dry beans. So a lot of good information to come. So I don't know if Shannon or Heather have any other things to add, but I'll just thank everybody again for joining us for our first class.
Thanks, everyone. See you Friday.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Have a great day.
Bye.
If you have any questions about credits, don't hesitate to just reach out.